everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kayla and it's time to crack into a good book. So today's video is another me trying to catch up on reviews. So this has a few more reviews from December as well as some from the beginning of January. So I'll do another 10 books here in this chunk, and like always we'll move from the lowest to the highest rated. So before we get started, leave a cupcake or cake emoji in the comments to let me know that you're here. So we'll begin with some 3-star books, and the first book I'll talk about today is The Seventh Bride by Kingfisher. So this is an adult fantasy retelling of Bluebeard, where Rhea, who's a miller's daughter, is forced to agree to marry a lord. So she discovers that he's been married 6 times before, and his wives are imprisoned in the castle. She's forced to complete magical tasks with the threat of marriage if she doesn't complete them. So I was surprised by this. I didn't love it as much as I expected. I think there are some humorous moments, certainly, but I struggled to really connect with this story. And I think it feels just like a bit younger than her horror books, which I absolutely love. And so, yeah, I was definitely surprised that I didn't like this because I do love her horror books so much. And I think that does a good job of blending like the humor and horror elements. So yeah, this one was kind of strange. Like, I think it took a bit for me to actually read it, despite it not really being a long book. I did like that it's a retelling of Bluebeard and how the wives are still alive here. I think it keeps up with the spirit of the story with her, you know, discovering that her intended husband has been married before, but it kind of does its own thing, which is nice. I liked, I guess, this change where she's forced to do magical tasks to avoid marrying him. These are fairly dark and kind of brutal, but I liked how it all fits in with like the fairy tale type feel with, you know, doing supposedly impossible tasks and getting aid. So I was definitely intrigued by the house and the other wives. I think there's a good variety of these wives, and I liked just generally like how weird and alarming the house is. I think the main character, Rhea, can be funny and brave. She's definitely stuck in a bad situation, you know, where she's forced to marry this person she doesn't want to marry and can't really avoid it because of this power imbalance. So she picks up some friends along the way, including a hedgehog. So I really enjoyed this, especially, you know, because of the animal companion aspect. I think she seems pretty nice and wants to help, and I liked her determination and drive to save her family as well as herself. In terms of some of the other wives, I liked learning about them and, you know, what this lord has done to them. I definitely liked the cook, and I think she's the first wife because she seems to be the nicest and does actually try to help Rhea however she can. Lord Crevan is a sorcerer. He definitely seems very sketchy and strange, even, you know, at the beginning, because it's like, well, why would he want to marry this lowly miller's daughter? Because I think it describes her, you know, as not being particularly beautiful or outstanding. So, you know, you do learn more about him along the way, and I definitely found him to be creepy and a good villain. So yeah, overall this was good, but I didn't love it nearly as much as her other horror books. But that being said, like, I know she has some other retelling type books, and I am still definitely interested in checking them out, and like, you know, I think her writing is pretty engaging in general. So if you're interested in a different take on like the Bluebeard story, I would still recommend this book. The next 3-star book I'll talk about is These Deadly Games by Diana Urban. So I received this for review from the publisher through NetGalley, and this came out February 1st. So this is a YA thriller where Crystal receives a message on a mysterious app with a video of her sister bound and gagged, and so she must play the kidnapper's game in order to save her sister. So I didn't like this as much as All Your Twisted Secrets, which was Diana Urban's previous book. I think some parts were really fast-paced while others really seemed to drag, and I struggled to get through it in places, though I did ultimately want to know what was going on. This mostly takes place in the present, but there's a few flashbacks to about 5 years beforehand that establish some backstory about a secret that the friends are keeping. So this somewhat worked, but it seemed to drag this out longer than really necessary, and I guessed where it was going long before it was actually revealed. So I generally did guess some things correctly early on. I liked the idea of having to do these twisted games to save her sister, and it definitely got pretty dark, which was unexpected, I think. It feels like there's a lot of references to like the present day right now with things like Among Us and a video game that seems to be like a fantasy version of Fortnite. And so I'm kind of wondering if this is going to age particularly well just because of those references. And I didn't particularly care for this myself because honestly I felt like I was too old to read this, and I'm just not a fan of Fortnite at all. I do enjoy video games, but not like the battle royale type games. So yeah, I don't know. That didn't really work well for me. So I also couldn't entirely connect with the characters. I obviously felt bad for Crystal because, you know, she's desperate to save her sister, but she makes some really dumb choices. I felt like a lot of guilt and certain situations could have just been avoided by telling the truth earlier. especially because some things are just truly accidents. So I did like her, trying to solve these puzzles. She's gone through some things with some parental issues and toxic friendships, but I think she can also be pretty controlling at times, even if she does mean well. So it's just not the best friend group either. Like, I definitely felt there's a lot of dysfunctional friendships in there. I think Akira is probably the most likable. I think that's her name. She and Crystal are close, and I think they do have a pretty good friendship where they can get into some heavier topics like panic attacks and eating disorders. However, I still don't feel like I know her all that well. Zoe seems to be not great, though her motivations are a little bit better once you actually get to know her more. The guys that are in this group are kind of bland, though I feel bad for them about some things that happen. And I feel like the characters really held me back, and I just felt too old for the references sometimes, but I would still check out whatever Diana Urban writes next because, I did like the previous book that she wrote, and I feel like she has, the potential to write more fun YA thrillers. So, yeah, I'm kind of mixed on recommending this. Like, I think if you like that premise and don't mind necessarily not connecting with the characters or these, references like I mentioned, then I would still suggest checking it out. But unfortunately for me, this wasn't entirely a hit. The next 3-star book I'll talk about is Road of Bones by Christopher Golden. So I received this for review from the publishers in NetGalley, and this came out January 25th. So this is an adult horror/thriller that takes place on the Road of Bones, which is a highway in Siberia where gulags were built along the route, and prisoners died while working on the road and were left where they fell. So we have Teague, who's a documentary producer, and hires a local guide on the journey. They discover a mysteriously abandoned village and are pursued by otherworldly beasts. So this was a very strange book that combines horror, thriller, and folklore elements. It's mostly fast-paced, though I did start to lose focus about halfway through to the end for some reason. I think it is definitely good to read in the winter, though, because it feels chilly and takes place in Siberia, where, freezing to death is absolutely something that could happen. So I liked the idea of these characters trying to make a show only to have, really weird things start to happen. I think the Road of Bones itself is rather interesting and horrifying. It does deal with these gulags and people dying where they're forced to build a road, so it kind of gets dark, but I think it also increases the tension levels with this, and I think that really escalates once they start to reach this mysterious village. So it's a very eerie atmosphere in general, and there are these super creepy creatures following them. Admittedly, I'm not sure I fully understood what all happened with this, and I feel a little unsatisfied with the explanation, but I also kind of like what happened, so it's a lot of mixed feelings in general, I think. We have Teague, who is this guy trying to, create the show after he has had some failed ventures. He's decent overall. I think he's trying to do the right thing and be successful. He's had some terrible things happen to in his past that he's trying to atone for, which actually motivates him in, these ideas for the more supernatural shows. So while some of his ideas haven't really paid off and he owes people money, he seems to be a good person overall, I think. He is accompanied by his friends and sponsor Prentice, who was all right. So Prentice is there to protect his investment, but he also seems to be friends with Teague. I don't know too much about him, aside from a few tidbits about his history that are revealed, over the book. And I don't think he has a ton of character growth and seems to be mostly there as like a motivating factor for Teague, but I ultimately did appreciate his presence. They do pick up a few locals along the way, and I liked them and just, learning more about their way of life in this pretty inhospitable place. So I think overall this was enjoyable enough. I've read a few books now by Christopher Golden, and this kind of fit in the middle, I think. Like, I liked this more than some that I've read, but I liked it less than others that I've read. So, overall, I think if you're looking for a good, horror/thriller to read in the winter where you have that, really atmospheric vibe, I guess, and just some creepy creatures and folklore elements going on, then I would recommend this book. But yeah, like I said, I definitely preferred other of his books a little bit more. So now I have a couple of 3.5-star books to talk to you about, and the first one I'll talk about is The Magpie Lord by KJ Charles. So this is adult historical urban fantasy following the new Lord Crane, who inherited an earldom as well as family enemies and needs magical assistance. So we have a magician, Stephen, who has a good reason to hate this lord's family, but it's his job to deal with supernatural threats, and Crane actually does seem to be different from the rest of his family. So I actually thought this had really similar vibes to A Marvelous Light by Freya Marks, but I enjoyed this one more. So I would say, if you had similar feelings to me with that book, where it was kind of not didn't entirely work, like I would still, but you still like that idea, I would suggest picking this one up instead. Like I said, we have Lucien, who's this lord who's forced to hire Stephen after another mysterious suicide attempt that he doesn't remember. There's an interesting mystery of, what's happening to him, and we get to learn about the world and magic. I felt like these mysteries and this male-male romance work together better versus, again, with A Marvelous Light, where I didn't really feel like those elements combined together very well. But here, I was not really bored at all while reading this, and I didn't struggle to get through it in any part as opposed to A Marvelous Light. So I think it's decently paced overall, and I definitely wanted to learn more about Crane's family, magic, and just like the darker things happening. Lucien is much more likable than his father and brother, and he tries to make things right. So I really liked seeing this, especially because it demonstrates just how much better he is than the rest of his family. He's got an interesting background. Basically, he was exiled to Shanghai and was actually a smuggler at one point. I think he can certainly be a jerk, but he's ultimately good at heart. He very much does not like being manipulated, which is understandable. Then Stephen comes from a lower class, and he's kind of used to people in power treating him horribly. He's got an interesting job in the magic world and is skilled at, using magic and manipulating the ether. I did like their romance and wanted them to be together, even though they do have to overcome some issues with each of them kind of wronging each other. I like seeing them start to understand each other and actually work together. So there's an interesting collection of villains. It does kind of feel like there's some missing backstory to them that would be interesting to learn, but I did like the motivations and creepiness of some of them. So there are content warnings here. Obviously, these suicide attempts. There's, I think, rape. Then there's also this awful scene with this hairball, and it made me feel physically ill reading it, so just FYI. But yeah, overall I definitely enjoyed this, and I would probably continue the series, I think. So if you're looking for a historical urban fantasy with this male-male romance, I would definitely suggest picking this one up. The next 3.5-star book I'll talk about is Made in Manhattan by Layne. So I received this for review from the publisher through NetGalley, and this came out January 18th. So this is an adult romance that's kind of like a reverse My Fair Lady. So we have Violet, who's a people pleaser and socialite who agrees to help her friend out by teaching her newly discovered grandson how to fit in with New York's elite to take his place as the heir to the family company. So Kane, this grandson, has no patience for this, but along the way, he and Violet come to an understanding and start to respect each other. So this is a very fluffy rom-com. I liked it, but didn't love it as much as To Sir with Love that I read previously by this author. I felt like it didn't have a ton of substance to it, but it was still really fun to read. I think it's very fast-paced and quick to read, and I enjoyed this general premise. It's admittedly kind of problematic to try to change someone to, fit in with society when they don't necessarily want to, but I think this actually does get addressed in the book, which made it a little bit better. So it's a relatively simple plot, but I did have fun with it. I really liked Violet overall. She was great. She's been the type of person to mold herself to fit in with, what she thinks people want and expect from her. And she is actually very good with people. She kind of realizes that she does want more from her life, though, than things just being, fine. And she actually wants passion in her life. So I really enjoyed her journey and how Kane fits into this with helping her, have the courage to be more of herself. She's very kind and funny, and I think she and Kane actually do have some similarities with losing some family members and growing up without parental figures, and so I feel like they fit together pretty well, though Kane is a jerk to her several times, which I didn't love necessarily. I think Violet does push back, though, and, calls him out, which is good. So Kane is very, brusque and doesn't fit in with the posh New York crowd. I really liked how he wants to earn things rather than have them, presented to them just because of this family connection. So I can really understand and appreciate this. He's not the nicest to Violet at times, like I mentioned, but it's fun to see her break through his walls. And I think he can actually be very sweet, especially to Violet's dog, which was very cute. So I enjoyed several side characters that we get here, like Edith, who's Kane's grandma and Violet's surrogate grandmother, and Ashley, who is Violet's best friend. I think Edith wants to keep her business in the family and has a bit of a romantic streak. I liked how she kind of, took Violet in at one point. Ashley, Violet's best friend, is entertaining and I think wants the best for Violet. And then we also have Keith, who's involved with Violet, and I didn't like him as much, but I enjoyed seeing where his journey led. So I think this is a very cute and enjoyable book, but could have used more substance to make me really love the plot. But if you're interested in this reverse My Fair Lady situation, and if you don't mind this rather fluffy plot, then I would definitely recommend picking this one up. So So now we'll move to 4-star books, and the first one I'll talk about is Spellbound by Allie Therin. So this is adult historical urban fantasy set in 1925 New York, where Arthur's life work is basically protecting the world from supernatural relics, and Rory's gift of psychometry comes with great risk. So we've got a dangerous relic that's headed to New York, so they must team up to save the city and discover an attraction to each other along the way. So I thought this was really fun. Like I said, it takes place in the 1920s, and it definitely gives off vibes of that era with things like, prohibition, slang, things like that. I think the characters do have to deal with attitudes at the time with, poor views towards immigrants, people of color, and same-sex relationships. The book was pretty fast-paced overall, and it definitely kept me interested. There are some fun, heist-type moments and investigations with Rory seeing if objects are genuine or fakes, and there's mysteries to be solved and even more. So it was just really fun. I think there's a lot of potential here for more stories set in this universe, especially with a variety of relics still out there. And so I wonder if this will also set us up for World War II, which would be really interesting. I liked the premise of these individuals with powers, and we do get to see a variety of them, though it's mostly focused on Rory, who has these psychometric powers where he can read an object's history, and this is something that I always enjoy seeing in books, and I don't see it all that often either. We also have telekinesis, fire powers, like reading auras, astral walking, and more, so I liked all of these and hope we get to see even more of them, especially because it seems like Arthur is actually gathering people with these powers around him. I also liked the idea of the powerful relics and how they have to be unlocked in certain ways in order to use them. I definitely hope we get to see more of this as well. So in terms of the characters, I liked Rory overall. I think he's had a tough upbringing and was put in a mental institution at one point, so I definitely feel bad for him, but I liked this found family situation he's in now. So I liked getting to see him trust Arthur and Jade more and actually want to help them. He's young, but he wants to seem more mature. And I think he certainly gets into some sticky situations with this, but I can understand where he's coming from. I definitely liked the romance here. It feels very natural, and it explores this male-male romance or relationship in a time where it's not really accepted, but those around them want both of them to be happy, which is really sweet. So I love the idea of Arthur being key to helping Rory. They do start off on the wrong foot, but Arthur is very protective and genuine, I think. I admittedly did get a little bit annoyed with how Arthur can be a little bit over the top sometimes, and he worries about their age difference and taking advantage of Rory, which is valid, but I also just kind of wanted them to get on with it. But it's definitely the slow burn romance, which is fun. So I mostly liked Arthur. He's part of a politician family and kind of has to hide his true self from the world because, to not ruin the chances of his family to run for office, which is really sad. But I like seeing, his journey of letting himself find happiness. He's not just a wealthy guy. He did actually fight in World War I and tries to make the world safe by dealing with these relics. Jade is a very fun side character. She's black and her family owns a speakeasy, which is entertaining, and she seems genuinely nice, and I liked her abilities with telekinesis. She's a very good friend and is very welcoming towards Rory and actually pushes them to be together, which I appreciated. We have a few other interesting side characters who I'd like to learn more about as well, so I really liked this and definitely want to continue this series. So if you're looking for just really great historical urban fantasy with male-male romance and, these different relics and powers, I would definitely recommend picking this one up. The next 4-star book I'll talk about is Such a Pretty Smile by Kristi DeMeester. So I received this for review from the publisher, The NetGalley, and this came out January 18th. So this is adult horror/thriller following 13-year-old Lila and her mother at 2 different time points. Lila has secrets she can't share, and she feels haunted from within, while Caroline is hearing phantom dogs everywhere. Meanwhile, there's the Cur, who's killing girls who are known to be troublemakers. So this is a very dark book about women and power with putting women down to keep them in line, but I think there's even more nefarious things afoot. It's very much about what happens to girls who don't fit in with the plan of how women are supposed to be. It's extremely dark in tone and rather disturbing, and you're definitely trying to figure out what's real versus what's not. It's very fast-paced though, and I needed to keep reading it. I actually did read it in one day. It switches timelines and perspectives, like I mentioned, between Lila and her mother. So it's between 2019, which is the present, and 2004, which is the past. And I thought this worked pretty well to dangle threads of what happened to Caroline, who's this mother, in the past and how it affects Lila in the present. It does switch at times, I think, to keep up the suspense, but I liked both timelines a lot because it really kept me guessing. We have murder starting up at the present day where young girls are being abducted and brutally killed. Basically, they look like they've been mauled by a wild animal. And it's like, is it really the same killer as years ago when Caroline was younger? So I really enjoyed this mystery. I think it definitely increased the suspense. I liked the general settings here. It takes place near Atlanta, and there's also New Orleans, and I really liked the idea of Jazzland, which was a theme park, and how it changes over the years. So in terms of our characters, we have Lila, this teenager, and she's trying to make it through school without being bullied or ostracized from her peers. She does have a crush on her best friend Macy, but can't really act on it, and so I think she's torn between wanting to rebel and be her own person versus like following along with what her mom wants her to do. I think this accurately captures this age and what it's like to, have a popular girl take interest in her as like a special project, and how she tries to do anything to keep Macy happy so that, Lila herself can be more popular. So she's mostly a good girl, but over the book, I think she starts to go down a rather like a darker path. It's really interesting to see these changes and similarities to her mom's experience. So I did also like Caroline. She's a sculptor, and I liked the idea of like these really bizarre creations that she makes. So she's in New Orleans in the past with her fiance, trying to take care of her sick dad and, have enough money to do so. She's really struggling to make ends meet. She's also struggling with things that she's seeing that no one really believes her. She starts to unravel her past and figure out what's going on, and I really liked uncovering these mysteries. We do have to deal a lot with men just not believing or supporting our characters, or, just generally being jealous of their success. So it's hard to read about sometimes with just like the gaslighting and mansplaining that happens. There are some content warnings here for murders and I think sexual assault, but yeah, in general, I think this was good, but it's also like stressful to read, but in a good way. So if you're interested in this like dark horror / thriller book with, anything that I've said here, I would recommend picking this one up. The next 4-star book I'll talk about is A Letter to Three Witches by Elizabeth Bass. So I received this for review from the publisher through NetGalley, and this came out January 25th. So this is like an adult paranormal rom-com / light urban fantasy, which follows a family that's forbidden from using magic because an ancestor casts a spell with catastrophic side effects. So Gwen and her cousins Trudy and Milo received a letter from Gwen's adopted sister saying that she's bewitched one of their partners and will run away with him at the end of the week. So Trudy is so stressed that she accidentally enchants her cupcakes, leading to the family to try to take back control of their lives and harness their powers. So I really liked this and thought it was very entertaining. I think it's pretty fast-paced overall. Again, I read this in a day, and I just enjoyed everyone's antics so much. I think it feels like light urban fantasy. It does have some romance, but I don't think it's really the focus like it is in a lot of other, like, what I would consider paranormal romance. I think the setting is fun. It takes place in this like cozy small town in New York. And I definitely liked this vibe. I thought the premise of this family like not being permitted to use magic was interesting. It feels like we do get to learn magic along the way with the characters, and it leaves the door open for even more exploration with magic and dealing with this council of witches that's actually prohibited this family from using magic. Kind of unfairly, but that's a whole nother situation. So the council has these watchers who can punish people for using magic when they're not supposed to. And some of these punishments are rather harsh. So this book is told in 2 points of view. We mostly follow Gwen, but we also have like the occasional perspective of Grizz, who is a cat. So I thought this was a little bit weird at first with Grizz, but I did like it overall, especially because Grizz's perspective ended up being pretty entertaining since he's like, very full of himself because he's a cat. But also I think it helps us understand and know more about Tanith's motives, and Tanith is the adopted sister of Gwen. So we have some fun mysteries and hijinks happening, and I had a great time with it, especially with like these enchanted cupcakes. I loved that part so much. So for our characters, I really liked Gwen. I think she's very sweet and wants to help her cousins. She runs like sort of this odds and ends business called Abracadabra, which I think is a really funny name. So I think this helps us show how connected she can be to the residents of this town, and shows how hard she's worked for a business of her own. I like seeing her try to figure out what's going on and if her family is in trouble. I feel like she learns more about herself along the way, and as well as her own family. It's like maybe she does actually want more out of her life and wants to explore magic. So for the cousins, Trudy I thought was very entertaining, especially when we discover what she's been up to and why. I rooted for her and really wanted her to be happy. I think Milo, I don't think we get to know him quite as much, and he's not my favorite of the cousins because he does some, not so great things in his relationship with his boyfriend, but he does help out, which is nice to see. I think one of my favorite side characters, though, was Esme, Gwen's aunt, especially when we learn more about her. I think she's very clever and amusing, and I liked that she's an accountant. So I definitely want to follow her more, and I think the book kind of sets up the potential to explore her in future books. So Tanith, Gwen's adopted sister, is obviously kind of awful, but I liked learning more about her motivations. So overall, I thought this was really fun, and I definitely want to read more. I think I had chatted a little bit with the author on Twitter, and I think she had said that there was, she was going to work on another book in this universe, which I'm really excited about. So if you're looking for a very fun, lighthearted urban fantasy where, there's just silliness and antics and, enchanted cupcakes and everything like that, I would definitely recommend picking this one up. So the last of the 4-star books I'll talk to you about today is Reclaim the Stars, and this is a YA sci-fi fantasy anthology edited by Zoraida Cordova. So I received this review from the publisher through NetGalley, and this came out February 15th. So like I said, this is an anthology from authors in the Latin American diaspora. So we have 3 sections here. There's To the Stars, which is mostly sci-fi. So I have brief thoughts on all 17 stories. This might take a little bit to get through, but, we'll see. So the first one is Reign of Diamonds by Anna Marie McLemore. So this is very short, but I really liked it. It's basically like 2 rival princesses, and they are set to duel to the death, but they secretly love each other. So it actually ended how I hoped, and I was intrigued by the worlds and powers here. I think it blends sci-fi and fantasy elements pretty well together, and I would actually, read a full book about this. So in terms of enjoyment level, I would rate this pretty high. Then there's Flecha by Daniel Jose Older. So this was pretty well written, and I like the general premise. It has some found family vibes with the main character and her partner/friend. It definitely had some high stakes with finding out some rough things, but I like the tie-in with some of these folklore elements of the hunter god, and would definitely read more to see the aftermath of, and just what comes next. So again, in terms of enjoyment level, this was the mid to high range, I think. There's The First Day of Us by David Bowles. This is basically a high school, but in space with some sci-fi tech research that seemed interesting. It does have polygamy and non-binary representation. I thought this was kind of interesting and cute, though I didn't love the second person usage. That's just something that doesn't work well for me. And it's basically the story of a relationship forming, so this was mid-level for me. There's The Tin Man by Lillian Rivera. So this was really weird and kind of sad. It's basically a post-apocalyptic setting after some sort of disease, and the character is the only survivor nearby until something appears. So this was just kind of generally melancholy, and I didn't like it all that much, so this was mid to low for me. There's This Is Our Manifesto by Mark Oshiro. So this was oh damn. So I feel really satisfied with this as a story, and it's basically following this wrongful incarceration of teens and all about trying to right wrongs and protest against racism, things like that. So it felt very powerful, and we do have some diversity here with LGBTQ+ and Latinx characters and more. So I would also read a full story of this. So this was high in terms of enjoyment level. So that was the first section. Then there's The Magical Now, which are more, I would say, urban fantasy type of vibes. There's Creatures of Kings by Circe Moskowitz. So this was an interesting idea, but sad in some ways, not truly living until death. So we have a kind of neglectful mother not telling her daughter about her heritage. So there's some kind of terrible moves made by a character, but seems to be okay overall. So yeah, this one was not my favorite. This was a mid to low range for me. There's Eterno by JC Cervantes, which is a second story about death, but I definitely like this one more. It's about sort of a reaper who takes the darkened people but falls in love. So it is rather tragic but sweet, and I liked the idea of these Eternos, so this was a high level of enjoyment for me. There's Whitewater Blue Ocean by Linda Raquel Nieves Perez. So this was an interesting idea of this family curse where they can't tell a lie without this visual and olfactory tell. It deals with families not understanding or accepting those who are different. So there are some content warnings for this particular story with dead names and family members using them repeatedly. Overall, this didn't quite do it for me. So this was a mid to low enjoyment level, even though I think that the message is important. Next, there was Leyenda by Romina Garber. So this is set in the Worlds of No World series, and I'm really excited to return here. I had read the first book and really enjoyed it. I still need to pick up the second one. But this is a very gender-based world where women are witches and men are werewolves, and the first book in the actual series kind of explores a different take on things. But yeah, we have a Zabet here who's trying to make a difference. She wants to enact change for women in society to have a bigger role and have more of a say in things and have the same rights as men. So I love that she has water powers, and I liked her as a character. I think This particular story does benefit from knowing what happened in book 1, but you can probably read it by itself. And yeah, this definitely reminded me that I need to pick up book 2 now. So this was the highest level of enjoyment for me. There's Color Coded by McShane. So I liked this idea. It's going through like this change where teenage girls' hair colors changes, indicating that they will develop powers. I liked the idea of this particular magic is like controlling different colors, especially since it seems like fun to play around with. The story ends on a really abrupt note, though, which was a little bit disappointing, and I would have liked more to this, but I would still rate this as like a pretty high enjoyment level. There's Magical Offerings by Nina Moreno. This was a bit strange, and I'm not entirely sure what happened, but it was kind of interesting. So I liked the gator and like this putt-putt course renovation, and it's, I think, about generally finding a home for yourself, but I would rate this as like a mid or mid-low enjoyment level. So then finally, the third section is like Other Times, Other Realms. So some of this is like more of the urban fantasy vibes, but then we also have some high fantasy. So the first story in this section is Rogue Enchantments by Isabel Ibanez. So we have Graciela, who inherits her grandmother's stall in the market and wants to sell her enchanted art supplies, but other people aren't happy that it was given to her instead of someone else and want her out. So I really enjoyed this, and I was a huge fan of the different types of magic that we see at the market. We have, you know, this magic art, which like I totally wish I had because I'm terrible at art and wish I was better. But we also have things like enchantments to keep your plants alive forever and wooden figures that come to life. So I really liked Graciela as well. She seems really good-natured and tenacious. And I also liked that we have the dead around the market at night. So this was the highest enjoyment level for me as well. Then there's Sumaiko y la Sirena by Vida Ayala. So this is definitely a darker tone here with men trying to take advantage of women who work for them, but I really like how the story ultimately turned out. I enjoyed the connection with the sea and La Sirena. It kind of is like Selkies, and similar idea with not really being able to return to the sea without like your skin or scales. So I enjoyed the romance here and did root for them to be together. Suma just wants to be free, and I can definitely sympathize with her, so this was a pretty high enjoyment level for me. There's River People by Yamil Sayed Mendez. So we have immigrants, I think, from Ireland to Argentina. So I think it's Milena can hear ghosts and the river god, and she's worried that something bad will happen to her family. I enjoyed seeing her try to stop this, even when her own brother tells her, she's like, she's just a woman, what can she do? But she is willing to do whatever it takes to keep her family safe, and I really liked her overall, as well as her connection with the river. They're just trying to make a life for themselves and, you know, have to overcome hardships. And we do have some family members who have adapted, you know, to their new lives while others haven't. But yeah, this was a pretty high enjoyment level for me as well. There's Moonglow by Sarah Faring. This was very weird and confusing for me, and I'm not entirely sure what happened. I think I would describe this more as maybe like magical realism. But we basically have a family where this father has kicked them out to live with his mistress instead. And I like some of the resolution, but it's strange. So there are some content warnings for abortion here. But yeah, this was definitely a low rating for me. This was not my favorite. There's Killing El Chivo by Claribel A. Ortega. So this is a story of rebellion and vengeance. We have three sisters with powers who try to overthrow like a dictator creature. This is also a little bit confusing, and I'm not sure I really felt much for this. So this was like a mid to low or low rating. There's Tame the Wicked Knight, which is the last of the stories, and this is by Zoraida Cordova. So this did have a kind of abrupt ending, but you can kind of like fill in the gaps or use your imagination, though I would have liked to see where this went. I did enjoy the story and romance, and I liked the idea of having magic for growing plants and how the darkness wasn't initially what it seemed. It is a little bit predictable, I think, in terms of where the romance goes, but I was here for this. So I liked our male main character not wanting to marry someone he didn't love and, you know, set off on a quest. So I feel like that was like a bit of a gender flip with that. But yeah, this was in like the mid to high range for me in terms of enjoyment. So overall, though I know that was like a quick rundown of all these stories, but I think it's a very solid anthology with mostly positive stories, and I would definitely recommend it. I liked the variety of sci-fi and fantasy, though I think we could have used a little bit more sci-fi here. I think, you know, we have a variety of different settings and cultures. Several of these stories have good diversity. So I've read some of these authors before, but I think there's several authors that I would, you know, based on their stories here, I would read more from them. So I feel like that's always fun with anthologies when you discover new authors that you're like, oh yeah, I would definitely want to try that out. So like I said, definitely recommend this one. So finally, we have one 5-star book here, and that's Burning Bright by Melissa McShane. So this is adult or historical urban fantasy. Can you tell I went on a little bit of a kick there with the historical urban fantasy, but that wasn't what I was in the mood for. We have Eleanor, who's an extraordinary who can wield fire, and she's the only one in England capable of doing so in the last 100 years. Her father wants to arrange a marriage, but Eleanor really does not want a loveless marriage, and so she joins the Royal Navy to fight pirates in the Caribbean. So I absolutely adored this. It's kind of like, you know, Pirates of the Caribbean, but if Elizabeth Swann was more useful and had fire powers, I guess. I think the pacing was good overall. We do have some action scenes that moved along nicely, but I would generally describe this as slower paced in that there's a lot of detail that gets explored, and there's a lot of character development, which I really loved. I really enjoyed the setting. It is Regency era, and we go to the Caribbean, like I said, to fight these pirates, and I loved, just being on the sea and exploring these islands. We do have magic in this world where these extraordinaries are like the highly skilled magic users, and we do have a few varieties. So it mostly focuses on these Scorchers, which have fire powers. There's Bounders, who can essentially teleport. There's Movers, who can move things and actually fly in the cases of the extraordinaries. We also have Seers and those who can telepathically communicate. I really liked this variety of powers and getting to explore society. People with these abilities are like very highly prized, so it's interesting how certain areas of the world often have more of one type than others. Like I said, with England not having very many Scorchers, I thought that was a very interesting idea. So we obviously get a lot of details about ships and the Navy and pirates, so I love this so much. It definitely gave me Pirates of the Caribbean vibes, and I really like this movie, so I was like totally here for all this. I feel like it was very much in line in terms of this era. It deals with what's proper and what's expected from a lady. In terms of her characters, oh my god, I loved Eleanor so much. I loved how she wants more from her life than, just an arranged marriage to someone she doesn't want love. I really enjoyed seeing her make her own path and having to deal with what society thinks of her in this new role. She's smart and willing to learn and work hard, and I loved her abilities as a Scorcher. Again, this is a very rare ability, and I love seeing her just be a badass and, have a lot of power, especially when men kind of dismiss her or think they're better than her just because of her gender. I really loved the romance as well. It's kind of this enemies to lovers type romance, but it also feels like a very natural progression of starting off on like the wrong foot, becoming friends, and then developing feelings for each other, which I thought was just so well done. We do have some heartbreaking moments here with them. Oh my goodness. Some feels here. So we have Miles Ramsey, who's the captain of the ship that Eleanor is placed on, and I really liked him as well. He seems to want to help Eleanor, even though it's an unusual situation. I feel like he compliments her pretty well, and I like seeing them form a bond. He's also smart and powerful. He's actually an extraordinary mover and can fly, which was really cool and interesting. I definitely liked some of the other crew members, especially Harvey, I think, because he and Eleanor form a really lovely friendship. Generally speaking, there's some gut-wrenching moments with these characters' relationships, and some of them are good, some of them are very sad, but I really loved this and think it has just fabulous character dynamics, and I absolutely want to keep reading this series. I can't remember if I bought the sequel yet or not, but definitely will be doing that. So again, if you're looking for historical urban fantasy, but this has like Pirates of the Caribbean vibes, but again, like if Elizabeth Swann did more, I would definitely recommend picking this up. I thought it was just absolutely fantastic and highly recommend this one. All right, so with that, those are the 10 books that I have to talk to you about today in this particular wrap-up. So let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books or think you might pick them up. And for your question of the day, we'll just go with, off of Burning Bright. Have you read books that give you Pirates of the Caribbean vibes? Because I would definitely be interested in that. So I do have a Discord channel, and if you want to join that, the link's in the description below. I hope you're all having an excellent day and are reading something awesome. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, as that would certainly help me out. But with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up here and see you in the next one.